Hello, everybody. I am the host. Zoom just told me I'm the host now. Welcome to Pharmacology of Recreational Drugs. What do we got? 23 people. Whenever I get less than half, I start to get worried. Looks like all the cool people came, though. That's good. All right, Brian Jacobson. Hello, everyone. Hello, Brian. Why am I worried? I guess because sometimes with this class, people don't come to class and they figure they can just fake it when they get to the exam and do some Googling, and then I either get a lot of plagiarism or just a lot of bad grades. So that worries me a bit. I think if everyone is reading the book, they don't really have to come to class, but I don't think a lot of people are even buying the book anymore, so it makes me worried. All right, Gus, stay down. Up. Okay, why don't we all get started here? And I'm going to assign someone. Angelina Pelkey, can I see your face real quick? Angelina Pelkey. There she is. Can you keep an eye on the chat and let me know if there's a chat question? Because when I'm presenting, I can't see the chat screen anymore.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, opiates. We are still doing opiates. Why don't you stop doing your opiates? I don't know. I like them. Just get myself together here. Mechanism of action of opiates. Okay, lay down, come on. Okay, so last time we talked about the different types of receptors there are, where the receptors are, and what the effect is of them. Now we're going to look closer at the thing in terms of the biochemical mechanism. So when you're in an exam, you say, and I say, what is the biochemical mechanism of this? This is what I'm talking about. What happens like in the cell at the subcellular level? So opiate receptors, opiate synapses are two different types, axosomatic and axoaxonic. So axosomatic, the blue ones are the opiate receptors or opiate neurons. Axosomatic is when you have a synapse to the soma, and axoaxonic is when the axon synapses with another axon. So if these are our nucleus accumbens neurons, there are some opiate synapses that will be right on the soma of the nucleus accumbens neurons, and that they will directly produce euphoria. And there are other ones that are going to affect the GABA neurons or the dopamine neurons, or we'll get to that in a second. Okay. So first we're going to look at this and what this is all about, and then we'll look at the axoaxonic. So the axosomatic then are just about always G protein coupled receptors linked to potassium channels, and that increases potassium current. So if you remember from chapter 3, potassium leaving the cell is an IPSP. So these are inhibitory. And by producing the inhibition, you get the euphoria. By the way, dopamine effect in the nucleus accumbens is also inhibitory. It's kind of weird the way the brain works. You know, you've got mainly glutamate and GABA, and the other ones, like all these other neurotransmitters we're talking about, are mostly just decreasing the amount of glutamate stimulation. So all these little things are kind of modulating the glutamate down. But anyway, be that as it may, your axosomatic is linked to the G protein increasing potassium current and causing inhibition. The axosomatic, though, or axoaxonic, are linked to G proteins that inhibit cyclic GMP. So we talked about this back in chapter 3 as well, I believe. So if you inhibit cyclic AMP in the axon bulb of this axon, that decreases cyclic AMP. So cyclic AMP normally activates a kinase that increases calcium coming through. So without any endorphin stimulation, you get more calcium coming in and more GABA being released. With endorphin stimulation, you block this pathway so the calcium channels don't get phosphorylated. There's less calcium coming in and less GABA release. So this is inhibitory as well. It's not technically an IPSP, but it's inhibitory because it's blocking GABA release. So if GABA is an inhibitor and we inhibit the inhibitor, we call that disinhibition. It's basically stimulation. Two negatives make a positive. So here's the normal pathway in the axon bulb, where you've got protein kinase A being activated by cyclic AMP, increasing calcium current. And then this is what the MORs are doing. They're blocking this adenylocyclase. There's less cyclic AMP, and so there's less calcium leaving the cell. Oops. Okay, oh, did we just look at that? Why is that there? Okay, so here's where it's happening in the nucleus accumbens. So if we go back to this kind of schematic drawing here of the VTA, remember the VTA is sending axons out to these 5 different regions, and they are releasing dopamine. So dopamine from the VTA gives you your euphoria. So when you stimulate the nucleus accumbens with dopamine, you activate these GABA neurons that are going to feedback inhibit that dopamine release. So that's your feedback inhibition. So you don't get too happy, you come down a little bit from that happiness. Okay, so now your opioid neurons are coming from the hypothalamus, and these are doing the axosomatic over here, directly stimulating, inhibiting the nucleus accumbens, giving you euphoria, and also inhibiting the release of GABA. So this is what I want to look at here. This is a really complicated little process, but I think it's really interesting. So this is where the disinhibition is. Inhibiting the feedback inhibition causes more dopamine to be released. And here's that. I made an animation of this. I believe I showed you this once before. I forget the context, but I think I did show you this once before. Okay, so without any endorphins, you're getting stimulation from the VTA. Okay, stimulation coming from the VTA is producing euphoria, so you're coming up, but it's also stimulating that feedback that's releasing GABA. So now once the GABA starts to be released, GABA is inhibiting dopamine release, and you come back down. And then eventually the VTA stops and the whole thing comes back down to normal. Okay, so that's normally what's happening. Now you throw you put your hypothalamus into work here, and your hypothalamus is going to send endorphins down to inhibit that GABA release. So here we are stimulating euphoria, we're going up, GABA is inhibiting it, we're coming back down. Now the endorphins are inhibiting the GABA, so you're going up higher. Okay, so we're inhibiting the inhibition, so we're getting stimulation there. Okay, does that make sense? If you want to see this animation again, I believe that the, let's see. Yeah, if you pull up my PowerPoint, this picture will link into that animation so you can look at it again if that didn't make sense. Okay, so that's kind of the biochemical mechanism. That's what's happening down at the small area. So now we're going to step back again and look at how this produces its effects throughout the brain. We've got 2 different mechanisms going on here with opiates. One is producing the euphoria and the relaxed sense of well-being, and the other is doing the pain inhibition. And I met a woman at Marywood University once. I gave a talk there a couple of years, and she said she worked for years in a drug company trying to separate those 2 effects, trying to get an opiate agonist that would relieve pain without causing the euphoria and the sense of well-being, because that's the addictive part, the euphoria part. If you could separate those, you'd have a really great drug. But unfortunately, it's the same receptor. So you can't get a drug that's going to affect one and not the other. So let's look now at where in the brain these effects are being formed and how. Okay, so this is the pain relief. Analgesia is pain relief. Okay, so first let's look at what pain is. So say you cut your finger and your finger hurts, right? You've got these sensory neurons here in your fingertip that sense the damage, and they start axons going down over into your spine, and they come in the dorsal root. Dorsal is the back side of your spine. So the kind of the afferent neurons come in that way. This is kind of an interesting little neuron too. Usually we always talk about neurons having dendrites and axons. This doesn't have any dendrites, it only has axons. So it receives information from the outside world in an axon, turns that into an action potential that relays straight past the soma and into the dorsal root, into the spinal cord. Now, once it gets into the spinal cord, hits an interneuron here, and probably several interneurons, but let's just say one to simplify things. So this is all glutamate, right? So up here, blue is glutamate, red is serotonin, teal, cyan is enkephalin. So the stimulation from the pain comes in, stimulates an interneuron. That interneuron then goes up the spinal cord and up to the rest of the central nervous system in your brain. And so it comes to the thalamus, right? Everything goes through the thalamus. Pain comes in there, and through several interneurons, you feel the pain. So this would be in your parietal lobes of your cortex, and then that sends it up to the front of your brain, which then sends information down to your mouth to say ouch. Okay, so the pain comes up your spine to your parietal lobes, and then you're sensing pain at that point. Now, when you do sense that pain, everything with the gas pedal has a brake pedal. So you've got a reflex loop here that's going to inhibit some of that pain. So the cortex now is going to send these, again, glutamate axons down to the midbrain and our paraqueductal gray matter. I talked about this a little bit on Monday. This is where a lot of the pain relief of opiates comes from. So this feedback loop then comes down to the PAG, stimulates these enkephalin receptors. They send axons down to release enkephalins here in the medulla, which are going to activate these serotonin neurons, which are then going to activate enkephalin neurons, which then inhibit that interneuron there. Okay, so basically we've got a relay station here going from the cortex to the midbrain to the medulla, back down to the dorsal root, and blocking pain. So when this enkephalin neuron is releasing enkephalins on this interneuron, pain cannot come through this way as well, okay? Inhibitory neuron, so this is producing IPSPs in this cell body. This is producing EPSPs, so we're inhibiting pain transmission there. So that's one reflex loop that's inhibiting pain. Another reflex loop is on this, I see there's a chat, I'll ask about that in a second. Another reflex loop is when this is coming up into the CNS, it also goes directly to the paraqueductal gray area, starting that loop to happen. And it also comes up directly to the medulla and the pons, activating again that enkephalin neuron in the dorsal root. So these three pathways here are all feedback pathways that are decreasing pain sensation. So that's why opiates decrease your sensation of pain, because you're directly activating these opiate receptors here and these opiate receptors here, and that's blocking pain transmission. Also, your amygdala has the ability to block pain sensation. So, emotionally, you can block your own pain if you need to, and then that, decreases pain sensation. So as it says over here, inhibitory neurons are decreasing pain reception. Okay, Angelina, can you read the chat for me?
Yeah, it says, would an enkephalin agonist work as a painkiller?
Um, yes, although they um, pretty sure they're the same opiates that activate the endorphin receptors. Okay, so the opiates that they use for pain management are the same ones that are used for everything else. Okay, so those opiates are the same. The receptors are the same there. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. Otherwise, they would separate those, right? It only makes sense. Okay, here's another function of the um, opiates in the brain. So this has to do with stress and your response to stress. And in your book, I made a couple corrections here compared to in the book. This in the book says CRH, and even in your notes it says CRH. I think CRH and CRF are the same thing. Okay, it's corticotropin releasing hormone or corticotropin releasing factor. They're both terms are used, but I changed them both to CRF here. But this hormone CRF is going to be central to this whole endorphin mechanism in the stress area of your brain. So this whole thing is part of that anti-reward system we talked about in chapter 5. So when you're getting, euphoria, your euphoria increases, your anti-reward increases to bring you down a little bit. So this is kind of looking at that system as if you weren't getting euphoria first. You're starting with the stress, and the stress is kind of the original stimulus, and then the opiates are like the feedback reward to bring you down from that anti-reward stress. So think about it this way: something really scary happens, like you go to a haunted house, ooh, spooky this time of year. So your CRF, your amygdala, then when you're scared, will release dynorphin directly on your nucleus accumbens, so you feel uncomfortable, agitated, upset. And it will also send axons to the RAS and release CRF. So CRF is going to stimulate the RAS, and it's doing that by blocking potassium channels, so inhibiting IPSPs from forming. And so the RAS gets stimulated, it releases norepinephrine in the PFC, and you get hypervigilant and aware. So when you're going through the haunted house, you're like, that's where that's coming from. And the amygdala is also sending those same CRF neurons to the hypothalamus, and that's causing the hypothalamus to release CRF. CRF then activates this HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So in physiology, you'll probably learn about this if you haven't already, but the hypothalamus releases CRF into the pituitary, corticotropin releasing factor, and the pituitary then releases adrenal corticotropin hormone. I don't know if I got that right, but anyway, this goes into the bloodstream, and from there it goes to your adrenal cortex, and your adrenal cortex releases cortisol. So cortisol is the main stress hormone in your body, and cortisol will increase the effect of norepinephrine in your body, so you get even more anxious, and it does a lot of things that helps you in a stressful situation. It releases more glucose into your body and does all these things to get you fired up to face that stress. Another thing it does is block your PFC, your ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So later we'll talk about this in terms of relapse, in that cortisol is going to block that area of your brain that usually gives you willpower. So you're not thinking clearly, you're hypervigilant, anxious, and you're not thinking all that clearly when you're in a stressful situation. Okay, so that's the stress pathway. Starts with the amygdala. The amygdala makes you scared, and being scared means being dysphoric and hypervigilant, and also releasing a lot of cortisol, which is also making you anxious. Okay, so that's the anti-reward. So we're starting with anti-reward this time. So you can imagine that draw it on my chest. You can imagine that pathway coming down like this, making you unhappy when that gets stimulated. And then slightly behind, delayed behind that stress pathway becomes the anti-stress pathway, which is endorphin neurons coming from the hypothalamus and inhibiting the RAS. So this is going to help you feel a little less anxious and out of control. The amygdala is also going to do this. So these endorphins are inhibiting that CRF effect, so making you less anxious. So in some of the things I've read, they say this is why people like doing scary things, watching scary movies, going on roller coasters and things like that that are really scary. Why? Well, you're really anxious and scared, but when you get off, you feel really good. And that's just like the withdrawal that you get from drugs. So it's the opposite of that. So you take a drug that makes you euphoric, the anti-reward comes, you come back down, and then the drug goes away and you feel anxious and depressed. So this is the opposite. You're anxious and depressed. The reward comes on to make you feel a little better. Then the stressful period goes away and you feel good. Okay. So it's kind of like this delayed opiate effect is kind of allowing you to feel better after a stressful situation, bringing you back down, relaxing you again. So this is another thing the opiates are doing is operating this. And so this is part of why the opiate addiction, after an addict gets the euphoria, the rush, and after the rush relaxes and feels comfortable and calm afterward. Let's see. Okay, so no, not yet. So that is two of the mechanisms. The third mechanism too, which I don't have a figure directly for, is if you are, one more, nope. The third activity of the, of opiates then is here in the raphe nucleus, okay? So if you remember, the raphe nucleus is is where your serotonin neurons come from. So when we did chapter 4, we said there are 3 important tracks that start in the midbrain. You've got your VTA, dopamine nucleus accumbens, you've got your RAS, norepinephrine, and you've got the raphe nucleus, which is serotonin. So here in the serotonin, the opiates are directly stimulating the raphe nucleus, which is then sending neurons all over the rest of the brain, causing this relaxed, happy feeling, okay? So that's the third mechanism of the opiates. And that's explained in the book. So hopefully you guys have the book if you didn't grab it there. Either that or ask questions. These lectures go really fast here because no one's able to ask questions here. Okay. Okay, so 3 different mechanisms of effect at the kind of physiological level. One is the VTA system that you can see in the background there. One is directly in the nucleus accumbens, producing euphoria directly, and also inhibiting the GABA release. So you're getting, inhibition of the feedback mechanism, getting more dopamine release. And the third one is by directly stimulating the raphe nucleus and giving you that warm, healthy, warm sense of well-being. Let me make sure that's all I have here. I'm looking at my notes real quick. Okay. And then there's the pain relief mechanism, but that's not part of the addiction process. That's how you get addicted, by using them for pain. Okay, negative effects. Believe it or not, there's some negative effects to using opioids. High dose of opioids will block your respiratory centers in your medulla oblongata. Okay, so that's how you die in overdose, blocking the respiratory centers, and you stop breathing. So you remember that little clip we saw from Trainspotting last time where when they woke him up, the first thing he did was breathe really deeply because he was an oxygen debt. He wasn't getting enough oxygen probably his oxygen receptors all over his cardiovascular system were saying, more oxygen, come on, breathe, breathe. But his medulla was blocked, so he couldn't breathe more. When the opioid receptors get blocked, then they start breathing again. So that's usually how you die. And also here in the medulla also activates the nausea center in your brain, the chemical trigger zone. So you overstimulate like that, you're throwing up, and you're not breathing much, and usually you'll die when either you stop breathing or you aspirate some of that vomit, and that blocks your airway. And there was a good question on the question thing this week. Something Heitzel, I forget this woman's name. I forget her first name, but hopefully she's here today. Asked, well, if you're, the dopamine receptor or the opioid receptors get down regulated really quickly in addicts. So over time, they need more and more opiates, and that happens really quickly. Why doesn't that stop them from dying of respiratory depression? Well, Christy Trask, who's got a lot of experience with this in this class, said those receptors aren't getting downregulated as much for some reason. So while you're not getting as much effect from the drugs, not as much euphoria and everything, you're still getting this respiratory depression. So that's not a good thing. Okay, negative effect of that. Okay. And, the drug that they gave him, this is an important drug to know too, is called Narcan, which is naloxone. There's also another one, a similar one, nalorphine, I think it's called, opioid receptor antagonist. So it totally blocks the opioid receptor. So by blocking it, it will instantly reverse that overdose situation. So you've got this addict. And I knew this anesthesiologist from CVPH. He moved somewhere else now, but he said, boy, they don't like it when you do that. Christy was talking about it last time too, how, you've got this addict who's in overdose, he's about to die, you hit him with Narcan, and they go from almost dead to totally withdrawal. So they're totally in withdrawal because you blocked all the opiate receptors, and they're not happy when that happens. Okay, tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal. So if you remember from chapter 5, this is normal. Drug makes you happy. Anti-reward comes on. Drug goes away. You go into withdrawal, and then you come back to normal. And over time, with chronic use, your anti-reward goes up and your reward comes down. So you get into dependence. So, and with dependence, you have to get the drug to feel normal, basically. So tolerance develops quickly, and that's because of receptor downregulation. And for that reason, people use higher and higher doses of the drug. And the doses can increase by 10 to 20-fold. Imagine that. It's like, 10 times, you have to take 10 times as much to get the same effect. And that also causes a lot of overdose because, people will go into rehab and clean up, and all the receptors come back to normal, but all that neuroadaptation of the anti-reward system still makes them feel pretty crappy. And so they what do you call it, when they go back to using, let's say, and they don't know what their dose is anymore, and they take the dose they took before they cleaned up, and they're right into overdose. Dependence, which is what we were just talking about, decreasing that set point for mood, so you need to have the drug to feel normal. Treatment, there are treatments for it. Usually what they do is try and manage your withdrawal symptoms while you slowly come back to normal, and then try and talk you into not using anymore. But the relapse rate is like 90%, so it's a pretty hard path to go. Methadone. So usually, most way they keep people off opiates is by either methadone or buprenorphine. So methadone is an agonist, just like all the other opiates, but we're talking in the last chapter about how slowly it comes on. So you're not going to get that fast rush and euphoric peak. You're just going to get this slow onset. So basically what it's doing is keeping you like right here Okay, so you're not getting a peak and a rush and a withdrawal. You're just kind of staying right here. So it's allowing you to live a normal life, but you're still addicted. You know, now you're addicted to methadone. But you know, it's better than being addicted to heroin, where you're getting the highs and the lows. Like 2-3 times a day, you're getting the high and the low. Now it's just kind of in the middle all the way. Like us, you know, we're at that state right now too. It's just we don't need methadone to get there. You know, they do because their receptors are so downregulated. So that's what methadone does. Another similar one is buprenorphine, which is something called a partial agonist. So a full agonist, like heroin, will maximally activate that receptor. So you get 100% effect. An antagonist like Narcan will bind to the same receptor and not activate the receptor at all. It just blocks it so other agonists can't get into it. And somewhere in the middle between totally activating it and partially activating it is this guy, partial agonist. Totally activating it and totally blocking it is the partial agonist. So it's in the middle. So it's activating the receptor, but not as much as the full agonist. So say if you get 100% effect with heroin, you're getting 30% effect with buprenorphine, which means that you're going to get back up to this state without going to that state. So you back up into this middle state. And the reason they use buprenorphine is because it's an agonist. So you're not going to get, or it's a partial agonist, you're not going to get as much receptor down regulation with it as you will with the full agonist like methadone. Let's see. Okay, so was there another, I think I answered that one already. I thought there was a chat a moment ago. I guess it was just someone new coming into the class. So, okay, people, if you come to this class, you're kind of screwed. Come to this class late, you're kind of screwed because we're going through stuff pretty quickly. Speaking of someone being screwed, whoever came in 29th here, class is over. Matt Cole. Oh God, I'm gonna bust his. Matt Cole, sorry, bud. Class is over. Shouldn't have came late today. It was a fast one. So, sorry, Matt. I still like you anyway. Okay, so that's what I have for today. Any questions? Any disagreements with anything I've said? No, nothing? Okay, well, I'm going to let you go. Next week, we got another chapter. Next week, we're going to be talking about stimulants, amphetamines, and cocaine. And then the week after that, we've got an exam. So, of course, Sean has a question. I was wondering where Sean's question was. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sean. Hit your space bar and just say it out loud.
I was just wondering, we talked about the mu receptor and the kappa receptor for opioids, but I remember there was a third one. I think it was sigma, but I don't really remember.
Delta, yeah.
Is that gonna be talked about on the test? Are there any drugs we should know that talk about that receptor?
I don't know that much about the delta myself. Everything I've read is been more or less, it does this, this, and this, but not so much. So it's mainly about the MORs. That's mainly what we're talking about. And I think I'll talk about the KORs, the kappas, in chapter 11 a little bit, although again, not much is known about them either. So MORs are really what we need to do. Oh, poor Matt had a network disruption. That's a occupational hazard in a Zoom world. Okay, no questions or comments. All right, well, I'm going to let y'all go. Have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.